have an amazing team that puts all of these events together, and I want to start by acknowledging our Director of Programming, who's here today, Deborah Deja. Our executive team and library staff include Aaron Espinoza, TJ Hicks, Bob Ray Cook, Rachel Horowitz. We have Liz Lawrence and Ruby Chu, our angel concierges, along with Stephen Garcia up in the booth, and all of the library staff who work diligently to put all these events together. I love working with you all, so thank you. We'd also like to thank the city of Rancho Mirage, our wonderful city and partner in our Writers Festival. Today we have Councilman Ted Weil, Councilman Steve Downs, and former Councilman Dana Hobart. Finally, I'd like to thank our angels who fund 90% of our festival. And it's because of their donations that we're able to put on these events all year long. So thank you all for your support. We have a couple of notes. Please take a minute and turn off your cell phones. Thank you all. And Adam will be happy to sign your books today and personalize them. So at the end of the program, if you're interested in getting an autograph or a photo with Adam, please line up against this left wall under the book jackets, and he'll be right over there signing. Now, on to today's program. We're so lucky to have with us United States Representative from California's 28th Congressional District, the Honorable Adam Schiff. His new book, Midnight in Washington, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Joining him is my dear friend, the Honorable Barbara Boxer, who served as United States Senator from California for an amazing 24 years. And now we are all so grateful that she gets to call Rancho Mirage home. So please join me in welcoming Senator Barbara Boxer and Congressman Adam Schiff.
This is really remarkable, Adam. It's for you. We're thrilled that you're here in the Valley. We're proud that you're a Californian. We're proud of the work you do. You do it from the heart. You do it from your brain. You do it from your soul. You're effective, and you're defending our democracy. Let's thank him one more time. So I know Adam a long time. We're very good friends. There is someone in the audience, who Adam and I like a lot, and we hope get to Congress. Will Rollins, please stand up. Will. That's a whole other long story. But we thought we had Raul Ruiz, and we don't have him now if we live in Rancho. Anyway, if you want to know more, come and talk to me. So we're going to get to this great book. And I predict, Adam, and I say this truly, not because I love you or think you're great, but I think when history is written, someday in the future, about 2 impeachments and 1 insurrection, your book is going to be the guide to what really happened, because you tell it so clearly and smartly and wisely. And for those of us who read the book, it's changed us because we now know things we didn't know before. So I'm going to get to ask you all the questions I want after reading the book. If there's time, we'll do audience questions. We don't know. We're going to play it by ear. We only have an hour to be together in all. But Jamie wanted me to ask you about your recent trip to Ukraine. I think everyone wants to know. Am I right on that point? Yes. And so before we get into the book, and I know you could go on and on, two reasons. One, you could because there's so much to say, and B, I know you. And you're thorough. And Eve has told me this, and I know this. So in a few minutes, like 3 or 4, can you give us the highlights of the trip? And welcome.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be with you all. And please join me in applauding and thanking Barbara Boxer for her enormous service to the country.
Thank you. Thank you.
Barbara persuaded me to run for Congress. I kid you not. She really is the one, more than any others, who recruited me to run for Congress. And most of the time, I thank her for it. I would, before I talk about my visit to Ukraine, I want the opportunity to introduce my wife, Eve. We are Adam and Eve. And as you will tell from the book, none of my work would be possible without Eve, nor would it be worthwhile. The speaker led a delegation to Ukraine just a few days ago. I would be more precise, but I really don't know what day it is. And it was a remarkable thing to sit down with President Zelensky in the middle of a war when he is responsible for the lives of millions of people. And, on a pretty much ordinary day, there are hundreds of his fellow countrymen, men and women, who are dying. And to see his calm amidst the chaos of war, to appreciate the full range of expertise that he has developed about the nature of war, about what he needs to protect his country, about the humanitarian crisis. I had to remind myself that up until a few years ago, this man was a comedic actor playing in a sitcom about a comedic actor who becomes the president of Ukraine. Hard to imagine life imitating art in a more incredible way. But when he came to office, he had no experience as a wartime leader. He had no experience in the military, no experience as a politician. And indeed, I knew a lot about him because I had studied him. He was a central character in that first impeachment. This is the same President Zelensky that Donald Trump, after all, tried to shake down by withholding hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid at a time when even then Ukraine was at war with Russia and Ukrainians were dying at the rate of every week, sometimes every day. Not like today, certainly, but they were still in a hot war. And sitting down with him and seeing just what an extraordinary leader he is, brought home in a way I didn't fully appreciate that it would until I got there, just how heinous it was that he was treated this way, that his country was treated this way as a political plaything by the United States. Here he is, at that time, newly in office, only months in office, his first experience with his most important ally in the world is to be shaken down by the President of the United States. Now, he explained to us that the war has really entered a new phase. In the beginning days and weeks of the war, Russian forces tried to conquer essentially much of the country, almost the whole country. They wanted to encircle Kyiv. They wanted to install a puppet regime. But Ukrainians fought back so valiantly that he was forced to dramatically scale back his ambition, Putin's ambition. And now Russians have concentrated their forces in the east and the south. In the opening days and weeks, it was close fighting. Ukrainians could ambush Russian tanks and artillery because they knew the terrain so much better, and Russian forces were dispersed. Now the fight is more a fight at a distance, in which both sides are using long-range artillery to lob into the other side. And in that kind of a fight, Russia has a big advantage. because they have the manpower and they have the munitions. We are trying to neutralize that advantage, but it now requires a different kind of military assistance than the opening days of the war. So we were there to learn about what do you need, what can we do, and we came back more determined than ever to make sure that Ukraine gets all the support that it needs to survive and to defeat this pernicious, murderous invader.
Whew, thank you. Yes. Thank you. And thank goodness so far there's bipartisan support, which that's a relief, right? So we're going to get to the book, this book. You start with January 6th, and I quote you here, quote, "The assault on our constitutional order was inspired by people wearing suits and ties and cloaked in congressional debate, but their purpose was ominous." What do you mean by that?
Well, there's obviously a lot of focus on the people that broke into the Capitol that day, those that beat police officers, that bear sprayed them, that gouged them, as there should be. But at the same time, none of that would have happened without what I've taken to describing as the insurrectionists in suits and ties, those that were promulgating the big lie. If you persuade people, and the former president, Donald Trump, has persuaded millions of Americans that our last election was fraudulent and rigged, if you persuade people that elections are rigged and their vote doesn't make a difference because it's all a rigged system, then what is left but violence? And the thing that so astounded me about January 6th, not that the attack itself wasn't so shocking, wasn't shocking, but after the attack was over and the Capitol Police bravely put it down, the Republicans I serve with, a majority of them came right back into the chamber, blood still on the ground outside the chamber, and picked up where they left off trying to overturn the election. And to me, that makes them deeply culpable in that attack on our democracy, and they're still at it. One of the things that I find so difficult to come to grips with is when Biden was elected president, I thought, okay, we're turning a corner. We're turning a corner. And even more so after January 6th, I thought surely now that the country has seen the terrible end to which Trump and Trumpism has brought us, surely now they will repudiate everything he stood for. But of course they didn't. They didn't. And the terrible scandal of McCarthy's recent lies about what he was saying in the wake of January 6th is not that he was lying today. I mean, anyone who's worked with him knows there's nothing surprising about that. What is shocking about it...
Tell us what you really feel, Adam.
I think I get that from you, Barbara. I was shocked, by the way, to see protesters out there protesting Barbara. I mean, that's just beyond the pale. But I think that the scandal here is not that he lied about about what he was saying at the time. The scandal is that if you tell the truth, there's no place for you in the top Republican leadership. Kevin McCarthy remains leader because he's willing to lie for Donald Trump. Liz Cheney has been pushed out of Republican leadership because she's not willing to lie for Donald Trump. That is the scandal. And one of the themes I come back to many times in the book is something that the historian Robert Caro once said in an interview. He said, power doesn't corrupt as much as it reveals. It doesn't always reveal us for our best, but it says a lot about who we are. And power of the last 5 or 6 years has said a lot about who people are that I serve with. It has shown Liz Cheney to be a person of great courage and conviction. But sadly, it has shown there are 100 or 200 Kevin McCarthys for every Liz Cheney. And it has also revealed a lot about our country. The last 5 years has revealed a lot about our country and about a persistent strain of racism that has run through the country since its founding. Because what happened on January 6th, as people with Confederate flags and Auschwitz t-shirts came into that Capitol, streaming into that Capitol, was not just a Trumpist insurrection. It was also a white nationalist insurrection. And And that means that our road back, our road to recovery is going to be much more difficult than we might have imagined.
Adam, one line that also jumped out at me as you wrote about January 6th was this one. Excuse me. Quote, "I was fixated on returning to the floor and finishing the joint session," unquote. So that means you didn't want to stop the presidential electoral vote count and the certification. And then you said, and you wrote, quote, "We really need," you said this to your colleagues, quote, "We really need to go back and get this done. We can't let them stop us, even for the day." Now, to me, this is the moment. I get the chills when I ask you this question. This is the moment our democracy was saved, that you went back to the floor. So my question is, when you say, "We can't let them stop us even for the day," who is them? And why were you fearful of delay?
Well, them was not just the people who broke into the building. In my view, them were the people who were promulgating the big lie about our election. Them were all of those who, through multiple lines of effort, were trying to overturn the election. Those who were threatening local elections officials, those who were engaged in bogus litigation around the country, those who were on the phone with the Secretary of State in Georgia, telling the Secretary of State to find 11,780 votes, namely the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, and many others. And they would have succeeded if they had stopped us. And part of what they were endeavoring to do was to delay that joint session so that they had more time at the state level to overturn the results at the states. The Constitution divides up the responsibility for elections and places a lot of that responsibility at the state level. And the hope of these insurrectionists in suits and ties was, if we can't get the result we want, if Kevin McCarthy doesn't have enough votes in the House because he's in the minority, then we need to delay certification so we can go back to the states and change the result. And so giving any opportunity for that would have put us at even greater risk.
And what I love about your book, and I've told this to my friend Terry, is the personal snippets of your life. You have a great sense of humor, so does Eve, to go through all this with you. And for example, you told us you grew up in a divided household, that your mom, her side were Republican, and your dad, his side, were Democrats. So how did that play out in your formative years, and what drew you to the Democratic Party?
We're originally from Boston, and my mother's side of the family, as Barbara mentions, were all Republicans, but they were, they were what we used to call Rockefeller Republicans. I have a wonderful blown-up black and white image on the wall in the Capitol. It's also in the book, of my grandfather, who was a Republican county chair with Eisenhower and Henry Cabot Lodge. It was a very different Republican Party. My father came from a long line of Democrats, and my mother's father on the Republican side of the family never used to use the word Democrat. It was always "those damn Dems." And my father's side of the family were quite equally as strong in their opinion, but there was never acrimony in our house. And I think growing up in Boston, I couldn't help but be influenced by the whole aura of the Kennedys and the idea that public service was a calling, that it was a noble pursuit. I loved the way the Kennedys used language. My older brother is a playwright. I used to be in my room and hear the sounds, the sonorous sounds of Richard Burton performing Shakespeare coming from the phonograph in the next room. And we both loved language. And so I think I was attracted to the Kennedys' vision, but also, and this is something the Democratic Party really has to regain, the Democratic Party has always been the party of working people, people struggling to get by, people trying to make it. And that really appealed to me. And I think we've lost some of that in parts of the country, where too many people don't associate us with that ambition for working families. And I want to get that back. And I think if the Democratic Party is to ever be more than a party that has a majority when everything goes according to plan, if we're to be an enduring majority, we have to start winning again in parts of the country we haven't. And to me, that means we have to start winning working families in rural areas, and I think we can. But that's what appealed to me about the Democratic Party. It's why I'm so proud to be a Democrat, and I'm more proud to be a Democrat now than ever, considering that the Republican Party has, under Donald Trump, become a kind of anti-truth, anti-democratic cult. There is only one party at the moment that's really devoted to our democracy. And I look forward to the day when the Republican Party is once again a party of ideas and ideology. I look forward to the day when I can fight with Liz Cheney again. But we're not there right now. And as long as they're trying to tear down the institutions of our democracy, they're just going to have to be beaten at the polls. They're just going to have to be beaten. And so I've always been proud to be a Democrat. I'm more proud than ever to be a Democrat. And yet we've got some hard work ahead of us.
Yes, for sure, without a doubt. I want to talk a little bit more about Liz Cheney with you. So I want to take you back to that night, the electoral vote count, when you said to your colleagues, we cannot delay even for a moment. Because you talked about in your book the role that the two caucus chairs played, Hakeem Jeffries and Liz Cheney. And could you explain to us what caucus chairs are so that the audience could know? And these two people, you single them out as being very important that night. So could you paint a little picture about it? And also, you touched on Liz Cheney. How courageous can anyone be? I want you to add color to that because I am astounded at her courage, knowing what I know.
So what happened on the 6th is I had suggested to the Speaker some months before the election that we form a small group to try to analyze all that might go wrong in the election. What happens if the Electoral College is tied? What happens if a state sends more than one slate of electors? There were about 1,000 possibilities. And we anticipated all of them, of course, except the one that happened. None of us thought there would be this violent attack on the Capitol. When it did take place, we were evacuated from the chamber, and at first I didn't know what was going on. Because I had suggested this group to the Speaker, she asked me and a small group of people to manage the floor debate that day. And I was paying attention to what I was saying and what the Republicans were saying, and the first time I knew something was wrong, I looked up and the Speaker was no longer in her chair. And I thought, that's odd. And then I did something that my wife thinks I really shouldn't have done. I went up to Jim McGovern, my colleague who was then in the Speaker's chair, and I said, thank God we finally have someone disposable in the Speaker's chair. Which he forgave me for that. But the Capitol Police came onto the House floor and in rapid succession gave us increasingly dire warnings about what was happening, and ultimately that we needed to get out. And when we did, we were ushered to this secure location. We were told not to disclose to anyone where we were because we didn't know where all the insurrectionists were. But of course, some people started to live tweet from where we were. I was particularly, at that time, because this was very early in COVID, concerned that a lot of the Republican members were refusing to wear masks, and one of them, who was in the room with us, had just been in social media saying that they had come down with COVID. And I thought, what are they doing here? But it was during that meeting when the head of the Democratic group in Congress, Hakeem Jeffries, and the head of the Republican conference, we call ours a caucus, they call theirs a conference, but it's the assembled group of the members of each party in Congress, got together and said, we're going to finish the job. We're going back in. We're going to finish the job. And I do think that was enormously important. Now, the remarkable thing about it for Liz Cheney is Hakeem was speaking for and in alignment with the Democratic members. But Liz Cheney, even though she was the leader of that Republican conference, was not speaking for a majority of her members, who, if they wanted to go back in so they could vote to overturn the election. So it was a courageous thing from start to finish for Liz Cheney. And, it's been a rough few years, I think, for my wife and myself. The death threats for so many of us are constant. But, I'm fortunate that I have a party that's behind me. Liz Cheney doesn't have that. And so she gets it from all sides. And that does require an extraordinary degree of courage. The times that often call for the most courage in our line of work are not when you're in agreement with your party or your supporters, but when you're forced to depart from your own party and your supporters. Those are the real gut check times, and we've all had them. But I can't imagine how challenging a time it is for Liz Cheney. Working with her on the January 6th committee, I can tell you, though, that she is smart and tenacious and I think just a person of great conviction.
I agree. I want to take it back to some more personal stories that I got a real kick out of.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yes, you can.
There were multiple lines of effort to overturn the election, and I bring this up because it's not just Liz Cheney. One of the reasons why the system held is because there were a lot of really good Republican local elections officials and state elections officials who did their job and did their duty and stared down death threats. And there are obviously millions and millions of Americans in both parties devoted to our democracy, or it would have failed by now. So I want to acknowledge all the Republicans who have defended our democracy. They're not well represented in the top ranks of the party right now, but they are really important throughout our society. And I want to acknowledge their courage as well.
Thank you for that. It's so key. I remember when I came up in the 80s, you weren't even born, Adam.
Yes, I was. I was. Eve wasn't, but I was.
See, there you go. Eve wasn't. So at that time, my mentor was a gentleman named Peter Behr, B-E-H-R, and he was a state senator in California, from Northern California. And he was my mentor on environment, on choice, on all the things and all these issues. And I remember that George Herbert Walker Bush was on the board of Planned Parenthood. So what I have seen in my lifetime is the saddest thing, because everyone's in their corners, and one party, and we won't get into Roe v. Wade. We won't get into Roe v. Wade, except I've now said it twice. One party says they're Freedom Caucus, but they're not for freedom, and the other one's defending freedom, and it doesn't give me any pleasure. But I get back to my role as moderator. Because you know me, I could go off. I keep thinking I'm still a senator. That's not who I am anymore. So I'm going to get back to my questions. I love, the personal touches, because and that's why I wanted this to be a little mixed, because otherwise we'd all be this way by the time we finish. So I'm going to bring up a couple of charming moments in the book that I want you to retell, if you will, or add some color to. So during the impeachment one, that's the first one of Trump, he called you every name in the book. And one day he called you sleazy. And you were a little worried about how your kids were going to take it, how your son, I think it was going to handle it. So if you could tell us how you handle it with your son. And then secondly, there's another great story there of your dad in a condo association in Florida defending you. And on page 147, don't miss it, folks, Adam calls it a scene out of Seinfeld. It's actually better than Seinfeld. So if you could give us a little bit of a break here from all the seriousness and talk about the sleazy comment and the Seinfeld scene with your dad.
Sure. And just so I know the parameters, am I allowed to use obscenity here?
Jamie?
Yes, okay. It sounds like it's encouraged.
It's in the dictionary.
It's in the dictionary.
Well, I had a different anecdote with the obscenity in mind, but so the first time Donald Trump attacked me on Twitter, it was something along the lines of sleazy Adam Schiff spends too much time on TV, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I over time I got used to all the Twitter insults from the president, but the first time it was kind of a shocking thing. I mean, the president of the United States attacking a House member by name, calling them sleazy and corrupt and whatever else he said in that tweet. And at this time, our son, who was, I think, 13, was at tennis camp. And Eve and I were going to pick him up. And one of the nice things about camp is they take away your electronics. And so unless he heard it from someone else who should have had their electronics taken away too, I presumed he hadn't heard this, which was good, because I wanted to be the one to talk to him about it, and because I didn't know how he would react. And so Eve and I go to pick him up, and we're standing just, you know, outside the tennis camp, and I said, Eli, I want to talk with you about something. It's not a big deal, but I wanted you to hear it from me. While you were at camp, the president called your dad sleazy. And we kind of paused to see what reaction he would have. And he took a moment to process it, and then he looked up at me and he said, "Can I call you sleazy?" And I said, "Not unless you want me to call you Sleazy Jr." But I think my favorite response to that first tweet, which is why I asked you about the obscenity, is I was on the House floor the next day, Barbara, and Mike Thompson, my colleague from Napa, grabbed me, and he said, he'd read the tweet, and he said, "Adam, you should tweet back, Mr. President, when they go low, we go high, go fuck yourself." I didn't think I could pull that off, so I didn't do that, much as I now regret it. But the situation with my dad, who lives in Boca, he's affectionately known as Boca Eddie, is he was at the club, and he was in the bar area of the club. He was having lunch. There was only one other person in the room sitting at the bar, and of course the TVs in Boca are always on golf. And he asked the guy at the bar, who was on his phone, he wasn't even watching, whether he could change the channel to something else. And the guy said, "Well, what do you want to change it to?" And my father said, "Well, I want to put on Andrea Mitchell." And the guy says, "I hate Andrea Mitchell. Why on earth would you want to put on Andrea Mitchell? She's the worst." So my dad said, "Okay, well, let's put on CNN." He said, "Oh, that's even worse." And my dad says, "What do you want to put on, Fox?" And there's silence. And my dad says, "You're an asshole." So the guy responds, says, "No, you're an asshole, and so is your son." And this is where this was really coming from. And so the guy reports my father to the board of the club. And my father, who's now 94, he's like saying to me, what are they going to do to me? I can just say, "Where am I? What day is this?" So he goes to the club. He has a very spirited defense. Some I thought stronger than others. His first line of defense was, "My mother always said that if it's an obscenity, it's in the dictionary. It's not in the dictionary if it's an obscenity. And if you look in the dictionary, you'll find the word asshole, so clear it's not an obscenity." So I thought was quite a brilliant stratagem. But anyway, he made his case, and afterwards they said, "Well, Mr. Schiff, if we let you off with a warning, do you promise not to call someone else at the club an asshole. And my father says, well, I will do the best that I can, but I'm not sure that I can give you an absolute ironclad guarantee.
It's just, is that a great story? You could just see that story. Oh, God, I love it. Oh, I just love these family stories. And so there's another one here, but it's more serious because your dad, very smart man. So it seems that he freely gave you his opinions as you were growing up. And so I want to ask you about two things. So the first thing he said that I want to ask you about, there's nothing like travel to make a patriot out of you. And you traveled a lot. And could you share with us how that may have really gotten you ready for the Ukraine war now, and of course your role on intelligence, your travel as pre-elected Adam?
Sure. I had, I think, a couple really memorable trips as a student in college, and then as an assistant U.S. attorney, an occupation that I shared with Will. In fact, Will and I were in the same office, although at different times. And the first, during college, I traveled. I studied in England for a little while, and then I got a rail pass and traveled. And I ended up in Sofia, Bulgaria. This was in really the middle of the Cold War. I didn't want to stay at the state-run hotel, which funded the communist system, so I arrived not knowing where I was going to go or where I was going to stay, but I just wanted to see what it was like behind the Iron Curtain. And I had a backpack and was sort of the quintessential backpacker. And I sat down on the steps of this kind of a steelworks factory or plant, and this Bulgarian man sat down next to me and started having lunch, and he had a couple beers with his lunch, and he gave me a beer, and he tried to talk to me in Bulgarian, which I didn't understand. I tried to talk to him in English, which he didn't understand. And we settled on French because we both spoke French poorly. And he invited me to come and have dinner with his family. And as we walked to his house later that day, I met him after work. He would point out to me these unmarked cars that were driving by, and he'd say, "Poliziai" and "Poliziai." He could recognize the undercover the surveillance state, basically. And I'm at dinner at their home. His name was Michel, and he was with a young woman, cousin, and his mother. And we were having a conversation, and I you know, as you would imagine, said, well, you've got to come visit me someday in the United States. And they said, well, we can't do that. We're not members of the party. Only people in the party have the privilege to travel, you know, outside the block. And while we were having this conversation, the wind, a cell phone rang, and it was before cell phones. It was very disorienting. But while we were having this conversation, the wind or something blew the door open, and the conversation just ceased. And it was chilling. You know, nobody materialized. It may have been nothing more than the wind, but it brought home, maybe I'm endangering these people just by being in their home. And I had never experienced anything like that, where it was the state you had to worry about. Years later, I would return to Eastern Europe when I was with the Justice Department, and the Attorney General under George Herbert Walker Bush, Thornburg, made an agreement with Attorney Generals in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania to send a senior prosecutor to consult, this was 1992, on reform, because the wall had come down, and these countries were now experiencing private property and all the crimes, the fraud crimes and everything else associated with that. And I was asked to go to Czechoslovakia. And when I arrived, it was Czechoslovakia. When I left 6 months later, it was the Slovak Republic, and there was a Czech Republic. So I watched the country divide, and when I first got there, I remember sitting down with the Chief Justice of the Czechoslovak Supreme Court, and he was very dismissive of even the idea that the country would separate. He thought that, the Slovaks were merely agitating to get more in negotiations. But there was the rise of this man named Vladimir Mečiar, who was this xenophobic populist leader. In a matter of months, what seemed unthinkable became inevitable. And I saw just the incredible potency of this brand of xenophobic populism as he demonized the Romani population and the Hungarian-speaking population, and basically blamed the other for why Slovakia was not progressing like the Czech Republic, which enjoyed a stronger economy, higher standard of living, etc. And years later, I would watch another xenophobic populist arise on our own soil, and see how the country was likewise rent in two, with family members not able to talk to each other. One of my colleagues, Jason Crow from Colorado, served on the impeachment team with me, has essentially been disowned by his parents. His mother as much as accused him of being a traitor when he was a part of the impeachment team. And so I think those experiences for me were really formative and informative of what I would see later.
Absolutely. So the other question I had about this was also about your dad, because you said that he was very happy that you were interested in the law and going to law school. And he said, he was pleased with your interest in the law, but he said, and you quote him, "You are interested in politics, and that makes me nauseous." That's what he said.
Yes.
And yet and still, you went into politics. So tell us why you chose not to keep on doing, the prosecution thing, which is very important, and to take a chance on running for office.
Yeah. Well, I think I had never intended to be a prosecutor my entire career. And one of the things that became apparent to me was that in many respects, when you're a prosecutor, you're reacting to a crime that's already been committed. And your role was predominantly to put the lawbreaker behind bars. And I wanted to work on being proactive. And running for office was a way of working on the whole host of factors that lead to that busy caseload you have as a prosecutor. So that whole idea of working proactively always appealed to me. I loved my job as an assistant U.S. attorney. It was an extraordinary way to serve, and I have great admiration for those who are career prosecutors. But I had intended, I think, from the beginning to do something else ultimately. And I had a friend who left the office and ran for office, and I loved the work that he was doing, and that was an inspiration to me. But I guess at the end of the day, and I think what my father was getting at there was I was pre-med, and I had been accepted to medical school, and I didn't go. There is nothing more cruel to a Jewish parent than to get them that close to my son, the doctor, and snatch it away. But I'll have you know that they came around. My parents came around.
That's a great
but
story.
I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to serve.
And you have proven it every day. So a little change, yeah. So a little change of pace here. Speaker Pelosi is mentioned quite a bit in the book. She shows up in every crisis, emergency, and that you discuss. And I have to say, I consider her to be a sister, so I am being honest about how I feel about her. I think she's extraordinary. I've served with a number of speakers. I think she's special. Having said that, what do you think of her? No, that's not how I'm asking it. No, I know what you think of her because you write quite a bit about it. But could you tell us, about Nancy? What makes her tick? The speaker. How can she do this as a woman from your perspective? How do people respond to her? So anything you can add to our knowledge of her?
Yeah. When I first got to Congress, I bemoaned the fact that I didn't arrive in time to serve with the great Tip O'Neill. I'd read so much about him, heard so much about him. When Nancy Pelosi became Speaker, I realized, okay, no, people who come after me are going to bemoan that they didn't arrive in time to serve with probably the greatest Speaker we've ever had. I kind of liken it, and this is a very dated reference, I know, but to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It's said of Ginger Rogers, she did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. Tip O'Neill had a huge majority. It's quite easy to be Speaker when you can lose 50 votes and still win. We have a 5-seat majority, or maybe a 6-seat, depending on the status of any absence or special election. To be able to pass major COVID relief, to be able to pass a major infrastructure bill, to be able to do all the things that we have done with a razor-thin majority, and not just a razor-thin majority, just an incredibly diverse Democratic caucus of members. It's a extraordinary task, and I don't think anyone else could do it. They certainly couldn't do it the way that she does. And it's a combination of being smart as hell, being tenacious as hell, being indefatigable in terms of her work ethic, and I'm in a constant state of amazement at what she's able to do. And it's wonderful to travel with her and to see her interactions with world leaders. After we were in Ukraine, we were in Poland meeting with President Duda. Poland has taken in millions of Ukrainian refugees, and so we were talking with the president of Poland about the humanitarian needs. In Krakow, there are 250,000 Polish kids in school, and now they have 50,000 Ukrainian kids. So you can see just in that one city alone the challenge. And now our relations with Poland have not been easy over the last several years. Poland has gone through a lot of democratic backsliding. Not to the same degree as Hungary, but nonetheless of great concern. And just watching how skillfully the Speaker, both acknowledges what Poland is doing, but also in a very diplomatic way is ready to push back and assert our own values and do so in a way that is both effective and skillful. Is really incredible. She's an amazing talent. I'll tell you one quick Nancy Pelosi story. I was at a campaign event with the Speaker, and we ended up on a sailboat together. And when we went out on the boat, it was blue skies, and the captain told us it was going to be a great trip. But no sooner were we out that the skies darkened, the rain came down, the wind picked up, and the captain said, well, we can take down the sail and motor back. And the Speaker said, yeah, we could, but that would be the cowardly thing to do. I can tell you, we would never do that in the San Francisco Bay. And the captain says, the sail stays up. She's quite
Great
amazing.
story, because I was going to say in your list of her attributes, I was going to add courage. You did that. It was just perfect. So in the remaining time, we'd love to see if anybody has a question for Adam. And we have, I'm not the boss of this. Debbie's the boss of this. So Debbie, you want to see who we want to ask?
Liz, will you start right there?
Okay, right there. Hi, Sid.
I have a concern that, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing the statement, that it seems like the base of the party says to to President Trump, don't worry, you don't need to spend a dime, we're all voting. I get worried about the Democrats taking that same attitude.
Well, I think that what we saw in some of the off-term elections in places like Virginia and New Jersey, which was just, I guess it was it last year or earlier this year? I lose track of time, not that long ago, was that Republicans were still very heavily motivated to turn out and Democrats weren't. And as a result, we got pretty clobbered in Virginia and we barely hung on in New Jersey. The big question mark, and I know we're not going to get into an extended discussion of this, is what's the impact of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, in the last midterm elections in 2018, Democrats had the most successful midterms in a generation. And I could tell what was happening before we got to the midterms. I was on a plane flying back to D.C., and a woman sitting next to me recognized me, and she said to me, I am part of an 11,000 woman strong group. We are called Law Mamas. We are lawyers, we are mothers, and we are pissed. And we're going to do something about it. And I thought, if 11,000 lawyer mothers have found each other completely organically online and are organizing to do something, something is really happening. And you had the Law Mamas, you had a group of my district called Civic Sundays that got together every Sunday for 2 years to work on campaigns. You had Indivisible, you had Swing Left, all of these groups outside of the party. I mean, quite separate and apart from anything the party was doing, this was just organic. And, you know, it was kicked off right around Inauguration Day with that Million Mom March. And we need that kind of mobilization again, both to protect a woman's right to choose, but also so we can pass voting rights, so we can ensure people have health care, so we can deal with climate change. So I don't take the base turning out for granted at all. That way, disaster lies. We're going to have to motivate our folks to turn out. And I also believe that to a very substantial degree, it is still the economy, stupid. And in the largest terms, part of the reason we are where we are, where xenophobic populism has such resonance, where attacks on the other, those kind of bigoted attacks on the other, are so effective, is because over the last 30 or 40 years, the economy has changed in a way that some people have been able to become fabulously wealthy and blast off into space on tourist trips. But others can work full-time, multiple jobs, and barely get by and have no safety net. Now that kind of situation is, I think, economically insupportable and unjust, but it's inherently destabilizing. And I think both for the sake of our country and the sake of our democracy, we have to address that disparity. And if Democrats can do that, we will not only stay in the majority, we will become a permanent majority. And that's really what I would like to see.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's quite a privilege to be here and see the both of you today. And Adam, you're certainly one of my heroes for standing up for the truth.
And sir, please take as much time as you need.
My question is, as far as I know, you're the only person that has ever prosecuted Donald John Trump not once, but twice as defendant. How did it feel to stand in the well of the Senate and look up at that august body and know that you were prosecuting a man who was guilty of what he had done?
Well, when the speaker asked me to lead the team, I was very candid and I said, I think we're going to lose this trial. But I think it means we have to think about the trial differently than I thought about trials as a prosecutor. I'd never gone into a courtroom where I thought I was going to lose. And I said, I think we need to figure out how do we win by losing. And what I reasoned was that there were really two juries. There was the jury of the senators, which would be heavily predisposed against us, and then there was the jury of the American people. And as between the two juries, the latter was really the more important. But one thing I did realize mid-trial, which I didn't really appreciate until mid-trial, was it wasn't going to be enough to prove the president guilty. You started to hear senators during the trial admit he was guilty. And bear in mind what guilty meant in that trial was the President of the United States withheld $400 million from an ally at war in order to get helped cheating in the election. And I thought to myself, if they're admitting he's guilty of that, what more should we need to prove? And I realized what we had to prove really was something completely outside of the articles of impeachment, which was, if left in office, he was a danger to the country. And so I shifted my arguments to be about how he didn't know right from wrong, how he was fundamentally dishonest, how he was fundamentally indecent. And I told the senators, he is not who you are. And I think that that really is the most important point. He doesn't represent who we are as a people. He can't represent who we are as a people. We're a better people than that. And that's the case I think we have to make. The American people are fundamentally a good and decent people. There are a lot of fears right now about where we're headed as a country, fears about our economy, fears about the pandemic, fears about the war in Europe becoming a larger conflict. And fear makes you do things that aren't reflective of your best. And I think we just need to bring people back to what America is about. I'm optimistic. I titled the book Midnight in Washington because midnight is the darkest hour of the day everywhere in the world. But it's also a time of optimism because you know that what follows is filled with light. We're gonna get through this. But I think what we do in this moment will determine how quickly we get through it, or how much damage we have to suffer along the way. And one thing the speaker likes to say is, she says this to the Democratic caucus, but it's true of all of us in this room. She says, know your own power. And the reality is we are all powerful within our circles. We all have the ability to influence others. And it may be a small circle or a bigger circle, but none of us are powerless. And the best way to avoid despair, and I know a lot of people are despairing about the circumstances, and after this Roe draft, despairing even more. We don't have the luxury of despair. And what's more, when you're engaged, it's the most uplifting thing because you realize that you do have power to affect your circumstances. And you know, if Ukrainians are willing to fight and die to protect their democracy, surely we can do what's required of us, which by comparison is so much less.
Debbie, one or two more questions.
We've got two more questions,
and then we'll wrap it up. We'll wrap it up. Okay.
Representative Schiff, thank you very much for being here. As you know, well, from my point of view, I think the president is doing a very good job, but is not reflected in his approval rating. While there's been a tick recently, what do you think he can do to captivate the American public and raise his profile and favorability rating?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the president really doesn't get the credit he should. His handling of the war in Ukraine, I think, has been flawless. And the degree to which our economy has come back from the pandemic and we've been able to get people vaccinated has been extraordinary. I think that really what the administration needs to do is I think the president needs to be out there every day blowing his own horn and telling the country what he has been able to achieve. I think in part it runs against type for Joe Biden. He doesn't like to be out there bragging about himself. But you know, if Donald Trump were the president right now, he'd be saying, last year I created 7 million jobs. No president in history has ever done that. Joe Biden could be saying that. Now, Trump would be saying it wouldn't be true. But Joe Biden can be out there saying, last year I brought inflation down from X to Y. No economist, left, right, or center, thought that was possible. I did that. Unemployment now is the lowest it's been since 1970. There are only 3 times in history it's been this low. I did that. 2 quarters ago, our economy grew faster than China's for the first time in 40 years. Do you know, we beat China. Oh, and by the way, have I told you that we beat China? Because we beat China. Everybody says the Chinese economy is this behemoth. We beat China. You know, this is, I think, what the administration needs to be doing. And what's more, saying, okay, yes, we have high inflation. And that's painful, and I get that. I get that. But you know something? I'm working on this. I'm trying to bring our supply chains home so we can fight inflation. And you know who's getting in my way? Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. There's a bill to bring jobs back. Heck, there was a bill to bring tens of thousands of Intel jobs back, to build semiconductors in the United States again. They would be situated in Indiana. The Republicans in Indiana voted against it. Now, why on earth would they vote against jobs for their own constituents, let alone something that would cut inflation? Because they don't care. It's not about inflation for them. It's about whatever's necessary to win the election. And if it means the country's suffering, they're okay with that. So he needs to make the positive case about what he's doing. He needs to be showing the obstructionism of what they're doing. And I think if he can do that, we will grow the Senate and we'll hold the House. But, you know, there's a tendency, and I think Obama had this too, of passing the Affordable Care Act and thinking, well, I don't need to be out promoting it. As president, my job is to be president, not to be out promoting what I'm doing. You need to promote what you're doing or nobody knows about it.
Debbie, we have one more? Last question.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Thanks for coming. I don't know if you're pro-choice or not, and I don't really care. Do you approve of the information being leaked out of the Supreme Court before it was ready to be announced?
No, I don't. I don't think that's good for the court. But I also think that the focus on the leak is really distraction from the mammoth significance of this decision. And you know, I kind of liken it to the very beginning of the Russia investigation. That was assigned to our committee. The chairman at the time was Devin Nunes. We have the first open hearing in the Russia investigation, and James Comey is testifying. And James Comey reveals for the first time to the country that not only was there an investigation of Hillary's emails, which everybody knew about before the election, there was also an investigation of the Trump campaign, which nobody knew about before the election. So we get this earth-shattering news that the Trump campaign is under investigation. And the Republicans on the committee are only worried about leaks. And it's like, hello, we just found out that, now actually Devin and I knew this because we're part of the Gang of Eight, but the country just found out that the Trump campaign was under investigation. Isn't that the more important thing than leaks? Here, the Supreme Court is on the precipice of taking away the right to choose. Louisiana is now advancing a bill in which using an IUD would be, a woman using an IUD would be guilty of homicide. And, you know, under this draft opinion, they can pass a law like that. And so to me, this is really what's most significant. But no, I don't condone the leak. They shouldn't be leaking. But I don't want us to lose focus on the magnitude of this change. The final point I'll make on this, and this gets back to the broader issue of democracy, the Supreme Court today is the least representative of the American people it has ever been in my lifetime. It is an anti-majoritarian institution. And with this decision, it runs even more strongly against the vast majority of the American people. And let's not make any mistake about this. In ignoring decades of precedent, they are not a conservative court anymore. They are not a conservative court in the sense of conservative legal doctrine. They are a partisan court. And the House of Representatives, because of the gerrymander, is an anti-majoritarian institution also. Because of the gerrymander, Democrats, though representing a majority of the populace, will represent a minority of House seats except after wave elections. And the Senate is also a deeply anti-majoritarian institution because of the overweighting of rural states. How long can a democracy survive, let alone thrive, in which its institutions reflect a minority of the views of its people. And of course, the other major institution that is a minority institution is the presidency itself, with the Electoral College. And these are things that we need to think about long term. But I take your point. Whoever leaked it, and I don't know whether this was leaked by the left or the right. You could make a case for why there would be a motive on either side. Either side would be wrong to do it. But I care a lot less about that than I do about the impact that that decision will have.
Okay. So now it's my turn to thank Adam from the bottom of my heart, and I know all of you agree. I know we have a bipartisan audience for which I am personally very grateful, because everyone always said to me, really, didn't Democrats just get you elected? The truth is, no. I always had 17% Republican vote, or I wouldn't have made it, because a lot of the Democrats, they didn't love me that much. So the bottom line is we've got to come together. And it starts with people like Adam who get this, who understand this democracy. And as you answered this last question so eloquently, I thought, there's another book in there. That's a whole other book. How do we reclaim our democracy? You could call it 1 a.m. in Washington. Anyway, let's thank Adam. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara Boxer, Adam Schiff. It's been a pleasure. Remember, if you want your book signed, please line up over here.